On today's show, Matt Darner, co-founder and CEO of CollBox and an expert in accounts receivable and collections for attorneys. We'll be talking about how law firms can get paid faster and enjoy healthier cash flow by improving their billing and collections processes and turning earned revenue into collected revenue, all without damaging client relationships.
It's not a broken system, it's a non-existent system. And I think that's maybe the number one issue when we consider the vast majority of law firms, which are small businesses. You've already done the work. That's the thing about accounts receivable that's crazy to me, is like you've literally done the effort, you've given the value, and you just haven't gotten anything for it.
Welcome to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring what makes law firms thrive. I'm your host, Jason Marsh. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and accomplished law firm owners in our space. Together, we'll dive deep into law firm operations, marketing, technology, finance, and everything else you need to build an incredible firm that allows you to live your best life. Hello, welcome back to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm Jason. Today, I'm here with Matt Darner. What's up, Matt? Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you as well, man.
Yes. So improving collections and cash flow in law firms, I think it's one of these topics. Every single firm deals with this on some level, but frankly, not a lot of them have it dialed in. And I think what ends up happening is most lawyers are thinking in terms of growth, get more cases, get more clients, get more leads, all of that stuff. And then what ends up happening is the part that gets overlooked is you've done the work and now you got to get paid for it, right? And so oftentimes there's just a bunch of money that's sitting in there in your accounts receivable, uncollected. It's in somebody else's bank account instead of yours. And so today I want to break down how law firms can improve their collections process, get paid faster, and just generally have a strategy and some systems that can turn their earned revenue into collected revenue, aka cash in the bank. So before we get too deep into this, I want to give you an introduction here. So again, I'm here with Matt Darner. He's a recognized expert in all things accounts receivable and collections for law firms. He's been helping lawyers and their teams get paid for their work, right? So he's also the co-founder and CEO of CollBox, and it's a platform specifically designed to improve collections and cash flows for law firms. But through that, he's helped recover over $100 million for law firm clients, and that's pretty impressive, man, I got to say. But recently, you've been featured in the ABA, you've been featured in the ALA, and CollBox was named the best business of law app by Clio. So that's some pretty heady stuff there. And then more recently at the 2020 ABA Tech Show, I think that was just last month, at the Startup Alley competition, you all took first place, man. Pretty awesome.
Thank you. It was probably the scariest 3 minutes of my life, getting up there and pitching on stage in front of everyone, but we brought it home. So I'm
well, you clearly did well. And, you know, I imagine it's not just the pitch, they're looking at the product and you've got something there. So all of which is to say, Matt, somebody that's spent a lot of time in the weeds on how law firms actually get paid. And so where these processes have a tendency to break down, and then more importantly, how to fix it. So you've talked about how inconsistent and frankly broken collections are for a lot of firms. And you mentioned some data that I want to share here. And it says that for a lot of firms, it's taking something like 90 plus days on average to get paid. And this comes from Clio's Legal Trends report. You've also mentioned that a majority of attorneys, something like 68%, say collections is a real major challenge for the firm. And that number comes, just to give credit here, 8am's Legal Industry Report. I'm actually going to be speaking with Nikki Black about that entire report in a couple of weeks. But awesome. In any case, at the same time, like a lot of what happens, I think, is these firms, you know, they have accounts receivable, but they're not really treating it like a system or a process like many other things in the practice. So it just becomes this more reactive thing. So I want to get into it with you. And so, Matt, from your perspective, like what is going on inside of these law firms from, you know, solos all the way on up? I think it affects all of them that are struggling to get paid and most importantly on time. So where do you typically see these things breaking down for them in terms of the collections process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks again for having me, Jason. So yeah, it's an interesting little space, right? Just chasing accounts receivable for law firms. I don't know how many others are out there like me, but I'm sure they don't have any hair either. No, I'm kidding. But so look, I think there's two things really that pop up to me. One is we have to remember that just like any type of business or industry, the vast majority of law firms are small businesses, right? So overwhelming majority, same of all businesses, right, in the market. But because of that, I think the number one issue is there is no accounts receivable process. It's not a workflow that's built out in the average small business, never mind the average small law firm. And because there's no process, there's no workflow, that means it's not getting measured, it's not getting handled on a consistent basis, on a persistent basis, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. And so, yeah, it's just, there is no system. It's not a broken system, it's a non-existent system. And I think that's maybe the number one issue when we consider the vast majority of law firms, which are small businesses. And then I think the number two issue that we can dial in on too is culturally what's unique to law firms. That I've been doing AR for quite a while for lots of areas, and most recently in my career the last several years just focused on law firms. There's something really unique here that I think deeply woven in the culture of law firms is the client-centric behavior, the relationship, and all those. Some of those things are so wonderful about law firms. Actually, is the same exact thing that gets in their way. And so I think the inability to separate taking great care of clients, being client-centric, but also making sure we're operating sustainably. So I'm sure we'll talk about more of those things as we dig in. But I think small law firms, the vast majority of which are of law firms are small. That's going to be an issue. There is no process. And then I think they, particularly law firms in particular, are just so concerned about that client relationship that it goes too far.
Yeah, I could see that, because I think for a lot of people, and I don't know, maybe there's something just within our culture, people don't always feel comfortable talking for money. I think oftentimes don't feel comfortable asking for money. I certainly know I've felt that the same way, but it's weird. On the flip side, getting paid is like one of the best feelings like there is in your business, right? You've gone through all this effort to get the business, to service the business. Man, to see that money hit the bank account. So, but still, somehow we all manage to have some problems with this. And so, so you've talked about how, like, listen, getting paid shouldn't be like some gamble, right? Like, oh, we're going to send out these invoices and we'll just see what happens, right? Because
hope
we know
is not
what
a
happens.
strategy, right? As we've heard it said in other places, but yeah, hope is not a strategy, but it sure seems to be the default strategy.
Yeah, right? That's what ends up happening. And so I know you just talked a little bit about some of the reasons that firms maybe don't, or they struggle to get paid, for work they've actually done already. I guess maybe it's a slightly different thing when you're billing in advance, which that's what a lot of my businesses do. So we don't have this problem. But it wasn't always like that. And so what are some of the things? Is it they don't like asking for money? You mentioned the relationship. Does it vary by, firm size? What else is going on around there? Almost like, as you mentioned, like culturally.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it's worth double clicking on too. Like, I think from law school on, right, attorneys, like it's drilled into attorneys, right, that you do not chase payments, you do not collect. And that collections word is really complicated, right, because it's carrying a lot of weight. And I've lived this and even struggled in marketing our own services and my education and things like that. I like to use it in kind of two ways. There's collections with a capital C, right, which is like send someone to collections, right? Yeah. That evokes the leather jackets and the baseball bat imagery or something, right? And then there's collections with a lowercase c, which is really like accounts receivable, right? And chasing your past due bills, gentle follow-up and things like that. But it's such an overloaded term. And so I think because of that, and that's across lots of different verticals, but especially from law school on, it is just drilled into these attorneys that you do not collect on. You don't chase them. You don't do this. You're going to get a bar complaint. It's going to ruin your business. Like there's so much fear actually associated with this one process, right? And it's so fascinating to me because I've never look, we're not a collection agency. The things we do with CollBox and the education that I promote it's the antithesis of that. It is very much, it's high empathy. It's, having great care, respecting the dignity of your clients, especially because it's worth noting too, like if you're a consumer, any type of law, right? But particularly consumer law, where we see the highest incidences of debt, right, is family law, immigration, criminal defense. what's the common thread? Everyone's going through a hard time, pretty much, right? Within all of those areas. It might be the single worst time in their lives, actually, right? And that's not something that should be lost on anyone, certainly not lost on me. And I feel like that itself is also, it's certainly not lost on the attorneys. I want to be very clear. They get it. And that, I think, is why they also struggle so mightily with this issue, particularly in those consumer law areas. But I think that from law school on, it's drilled in. This concept of a bar complaint is very real to them, and it should be taken seriously, but it should also be measured here, right? I think, too, like when you operate above board and you run a great shop, your risk of actually losing in one of those situations, or someone kind of being found against you, is lower.
So is there some scenario that's actually real where you can get a bar complaint and be found guilty of something simply for asking to be paid for the work that you've done?
Yeah, let's be honest though, like, and transparent for everyone. Yes, why? Because there could be a client that's super vindictive, and like, you just can't control for human behavior, right? Sometimes it's malice, sometimes it's not. I think in these cases that we're about to talk about are malicious ones, where everyone's had that client where you're like, oh my God, this was the worst one. I gave them everything. I bent over backwards. My whole team did. They were rude to us. You just can't satisfy them, right? We've all been there if you deal with any number of clients.
Yeah, and then the nice thing is then they turn out to be the big pain in the asses, and then they don't pay you.
And then they don't pay you, and then if you try to chase it. So there is some strategy here when I give classes on this. Most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I was presenting at the ALA National Conference and had a chance to talk with more of the legal administrator side of things there about strategies and kind of like what to do and how to bucket out these different clients, right? Because there are some that you should probably not go after, right? And you should just trust your gut. I just don't think categorically we should say, oh, it's all going to happen, every client. Whereas the reality is the vast majority of clients are good people, and the reasons they can't pay are not maliciously motivated, right? That's, thankfully, in my travels, I've been doing this a really long time. It's not most of the time. It feels like it sometimes. Now, it might be rude or disrespectful when clients don't pay, but there's usually a deeper reason, right? Like they're unsatisfied with what's going on, or they're most likely, especially in consumer, but even in business, they're facing financial hardship, right? And no one wants to admit that. That's super embarrassing. You feel incredibly ashamed of that. And we've all, if you've ever had a hard time, like, who do you want to tell that to? No one, right? And so you really got to tease that out of them in a gentle way.
So you just start ducking those emails and those phone
People
calls
avoid.
It's a tough conversation for the person that owes the money to have. All right,
we'll
get into some of that other stuff, but before we do that, I want to identify what I think is more of a real problem with your collections, and that is sort of the consequence to the firm and the cost to that firm when the payments are delayed 60, 90, 120 days beyond that, and the hit that your cash flow takes, and then how that affects the business operation more widely.
Yeah, honestly, it has the recipe of being catastrophic, like firm ending, right? If you leave it unchecked, it's possible, right? I don't want to be too apocalyptic here, but I think, look, I'm a business owner, you are as well, those listening are most likely as well. It's like sometimes you take your hand off the wheel, right, on certain metrics, and you're not always measuring that as often as you should be. Crazily enough, this is a thing that I feel firms are not measuring most of the time, right, or thinking through completely. And this one has the most chance of doing insane damage to your business, or at least your sanity and your job satisfaction, right? So you mentioned at the top, Clio, the Legal Trends Report. This is a fantastic resource. Whether you use Clio or not, this is a great resource taken across thousands and thousands of firms. So it's a huge body of data, which is why we cite it so often. And so they state that the average time to get paid for their firms in this study is 93 days. This was in the 2025 report, came out in October.
That's a long time.
That's a long time. Imagine the work we're doing today. Right now, we're not going to see a dime for that for more than a quarter. Like, you can't build a life off of that. Now, juxtapose this with your fixed expenses are either monthly or biweekly, right? Talking rent, mortgage, whatever it might be, and your payroll, right? If you have employees and staff, imagine them not getting paid for a quarter. They'd riot. You'd be out of business, right?
Well, that's just it, right? You have somebody, and hopefully you don't have many, and it doesn't create this type of cash crunch. But the reality is, if other people are struggling, they're not paying your bills, unless you
All
just
rolls
have, a
downhill.
pile of cash sitting in your bank account, you may end up that person, especially for a law firm or any service-based business. When those payrolls hit, that's a massive chunk of cash that you need to have ready to go out. And I imagine any firm, any business out there, that's humiliating as an owner or leader, that you can't even pay your team, and obviously the damage
You're
that
cutting
can
your own
do.
salary. If it comes down to the wire, then I can't remember this stat. I don't want to misstate it, but it's an extreme percentage of business owners. This is outside of legal too, that have foregone their own salary and compensation to make payroll before, right? And I think if you're growing a business, maybe you've been there. I've certainly cut my salary back in the growth story in CollBox before. Both my co-founder and I decided to take less so that we could invest in the business. We had bigger ambitions, and that was intentional. Thankfully, it wasn't we have to make payroll.
Well, that's different. When
That's
you're
different,
saying, hey,
but the sacrifices that we're already going through as business owners for everything we're doing, all the risk we're taking, we're putting it all on the line, and then to be in a position where we can't pay our people who are making our firms thrive and be what they are, and it makes me so angry, honestly, and why I do what I do. And then the flip side is why it's so rewarding is when we can kind of unlock that cash flow, get it moving. I had a client recently, I did a little live content with a partner who kind of set this whole relationship up. We worked into this firm, and she said, thanks to your efforts and this other vendor that was a part of the billing side of things, I bought my dream car. And I was like, oh my God, really? And it was one of the new electric Volkswagen buses. And I was like, oh yeah, those things are so cool.
And that's just because they were able to actually collect the money that was owed to them.
It's
obviously
money.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
That's right. Yeah, we were able to recover over $400,000 for that firm.
Oh man.
And she could have bought a few of those buses, but she bought one. Yeah. And I'm just so happy for her and anyone else that's had that outcome, because you've already done the work. That's the thing about accounts receivable that's crazy to me, is you've literally already bled out for this. You've done the effort. You've given the value. You just haven't gotten anything for it, right? Yeah.
Well, let's now talk about what you've talked about, which is where these collection problems actually start. And so you've made the point that these collections problems are not starting when the bill goes out and doesn't get paid, but it's when you sign up the new client. It starts at intake. So how are firms creating their own collections process right from the start during their initial, client intake meeting?
I think something unique to the legal space. So before being an owner of a company, a founder, let's say, I'm lifelong sales guy, right? So always in sales, talking all the time, always trying to sell something. But what I realized in that time is people don't even like talking about money before the transaction. Certainly they don't want to talk about it after, and the chasing of the money is even more painful. People really struggle with that. But people really struggle with even this, what we might call the sales portion, or in legal, the intake portion, right? And it's certainly tied into intake. And I think one way, just way up the chain, before you even talk to a guy like me about what I know, is not setting good expectations on cost. And it can be very hard for attorneys. And I understand why that's difficult, but I think it's important to call out what's going on here. And I'm going to pick on family law a little bit, because that's the vast majority of my clientele is actually family law. And we work with all practice areas, but that's the majority. I think it's 50-60% right now. And so it's a big group for us. And some of it comes down to if you want a divorce, things might start amicable and then they stop being amicable halfway through, right? Family law attorneys have it really hard, because a completely uncontested divorce is really something that should be, I think, flat feed, right? It's pretty much, it's just in a box of it's administrative work, right? If it's not contested, right? It's a big if, and things can change partway through. But I think what is really challenging, but just to call it out, is when a client really has no understanding of what something costs until they're already in the process and they're halfway through it, they're going down, they're halfway through the river, right? So to speak, crossing the stream. That's a really bad predicament to put yourself in as any type of professional, right?
And
Scope lost, right?
Yeah. Now, is that essentially part of the sales process? What you're describing is through that you should be building value in terms of the value you're going to provide, and make it clear in terms of what they're going to compensate you for that value. Is that part of what you're saying? Is if they understand that you're providing something of real meaningful value there, they feel that, they understand that, they're more likely to be comfortable when it comes time to pay the bill?
I mean, that's always true. It's a great thing to call out. And so like Foonberg, lots of legal texts written by Foonberg. There's a thing called the Foonberg gratitude curve that I think a lot of attorneys maybe haven't looked at since law school, but look that up, Google it, the Foonberg gratitude curve, and basically it's proximity to value generated, right? So that the client perceives value from the attorney, and then the gratitude they feel for them kind of follows a normal curve, right? But it's kind of like, I don't know you yet. We haven't done anything. Oh my God, they're really killing it for me. This is going really, and sorry, who are you? I don't know. I don't remember if we ever did anything together. And it over time, right? And it ends up being a problem because the best time to collect is either all in advance, which is not practical in many cases, or at peak gratitude, right? The worst time to collect is at the end of a case when you've done all the work, you've lost all your leverage, and or at, again, which is related, the absolute floor or basement in some cases if things go poorly of gratitude, and it's going to be way harder. So there is a strategy to this. And so the other thing I would add, so that's one thing, everything you said I completely agree with, and then so gratitude, value generation, those are just block and tackle, like really important things to be strategic about. The other thing though is just setting real expectations on cost as much as you can. And I think a lot of attorneys give themselves a little bit too much grace on this, like, well, it depends. It's like, look at the data. So
what do you mean by that specifically? Yeah. And how do you frame that in actual words in that discussion?
Right. So use data, right? Like at the end of the day, right, you're using a practice management system. We'll keep going with Clio or my case, right? Because 8AM has that other great study as well, the legal industry report. Those are two great partners of ours. So I work with those guys. You have these practice management systems for a reason, right? To make your life easier, to get the job done faster, more efficiently. Well, it's also an insane repository of data. And so what I mean by that when we talk about pricing expectations is you need to be reviewing your cases for a number of reasons, right? What types of matters are we taking on, right? Are they in our sweet spot? Well, what is our sweet spot? Ideally, the things we like to do that get us paid, and profitably so, right? And that's all information captured inside your practice management system, and to some degree your accounting system, of course, as well. But we need to be reviewing that, I would say, on at least a yearly basis. Quarterly might be nice, or biannually. And what I mean by that is, again, what cases are we taking on? How much did we charge for them? What were the collection rates on those? Look at the profitability versus our time and who we ultimately paid to do it. This is just deep business, business stuff.
And you're saying you share this with the client. In other words, when you're saying the client should understand what your costs are to deliver the work to them.
I think that's not bad. What I guess where I want to go with that is you deeply understanding your own costs. And then particularly, I'm going to, again, stick with family law just to keep it going on that. But if what we do are divorces, right, we should deeply understand our costs associated with those divorces. And when we look backwards on data, we can see uncontested, contested, maybe some other variables that I'm not covering here. And you can understand what that typically costs, right? And you can paint those expectations. I'm not actually going all the way to say you should flat fee everything. There's a lot of people in the space that think that's true. I'm in the middle on that. We can talk about that as certainly as a tactic to get paid and improve your quality of collections. But I think that if you go backwards and look at what you've already done over the last year, we're kind of a quarter in to 2026 at this exact moment, right? Let's go look back at 2025's data, the last full year, right? What did we bill? What was collected? What did we charge? All these things, and then do the analysis. Take that back into your sales conversations, right? Your intake conversations. So when we set the expectation with clients, this is, I want to divorce him. I want blood, right? Like there's every family law attorney hearing that's going, oh my God, I know that client. Well, that's a very different price category than like, just didn't work out. It's time for us to separate this cleanly.
So some of this sounds like just you're setting expectations, right? Whether that's like, hey, this, so if you're charging by the hour, not doing a flat fee, just to say, all right, for this type of case, I can estimate it's going to be around this. And now, of course, if it's a little lower, a little higher, it's probably not going to be an issue. But if you go way beyond that, now you've created bad expectations and maybe haven't done a good job to, define why things are changing in the process. But can we talk about just going back to that initial client intake conversation? Like, what type of expectations should be discussed before any of the work begins in terms of how often you're billing and the payment methods, and what happens if you miss a payment, or what will cause you to just stop working on their matter altogether?
Yeah, all great questions. And I think too many attorneys rely on their fee agreements to communicate this, right, to the client, almost as if for the first time. And that's the problem, right? It's in there, and by the letter of the law, you're covered, and that's what they agree to by signing it. But come on, let's be honest with ourselves. Like, how many terms of service return you're clicking through, right? Hopefully people read it. They don't. Like, don't assume that they will, right? Or not as carefully as they should. So we need to be going through every single item in that fee agreement, particularly, as you pointed out, Jason, that here's what the initial retainer looks like. Here's how much it is. Now, again, that's data driven, right? That needs to be able to cover us through X number of steps through most cases, all varies by practice area, but X percentage of the case or milestones, things like that. And that needs to give you a healthy buffer. It needs to be clearly communicated how you do your retainer. So, and is it the initial retainer that's a deposit you're going to not touch ever and hang on to till the end? Is it an evergreen retainer that as I go down the retaining, I use up my funds, I ultimately need to replenish that? How much do I have to pay when I replenish that? How often is that going to be happen? Most likely, again, as compared to the likely total cost of my legal matter, right? That's where I think a lot gets lost, because an initial $5,000 retainer might be really hard for someone like the average consumer, like who has $5,000 lying around. Well, if that was already very difficult, but I had no idea that the total cost is likely to be $25,000 for this, that's when I might just bail on you, right? At some point, if I truly didn't understand. Again, remember, attorneys, I think, are getting to know this more. There's good conversations happening, but clients know so much less than you think they know about how you work. It's not their business, right? It is your job to communicate that to them. And the better we do up the chain earlier on in the process, while driving value, like you said, while communicating clearly, I think using your own data, because these are in your jurisdiction, your clientele, these are the cases. It's the real amount you charge, right? Use the data, it's there. And then we can seek to prevent some of these downstream consequences, which is frustration, lack of financial means, right, to pay those things, or just general sticker shock, which is just very real.
And so is some of that, I would imagine, is just, and again, this might go back to lawyers at a law school. Somebody has a case, you want to help them, but you really do need to be qualifying these prospects, not just to determine do they have a case that you can handle, what can they afford to pay you, and I think that's right. A critical thing. But let's talk some billing here. I know you have ideas around creating a good process around this, because I think honestly this is where firms lose all the momentum entirely. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but what you've said is bill early, bill often, and of course, make it easy for them to pay you. And so why is inconsistent billing such a problem for, law firms? I've heard so many times, I'm months behind on just getting my billing out. I mean, you can see how that's going to create a massive cash flow problem at some point, depending on what you got going on. Some of these might be solos and, whatever, it's just going to be their cash problem. But
right.
But yeah, but why so inconsistent with just getting the bills out?
Man, I think the root of everything here as a business owner, right? Like, I'm living this all the time. I think you have as well. But like, there are things I'm good at and there are things I'm terrible at, right? And like I said, lifelong sales guy, you could put me on any consultation. I could be dead asleep. And I think you could wake me up, give me 3 bullet points and throw me in. And I'd be great at that. And I think for some attorneys, that's the way of with legal work, what they're passionate about. Whether you're a litigator, you're doing more transactional work, whatever it might be that you're great at, what brought you to your practice area, that's what your superpower is. That's what you want to do. And then there's everything else, right? And so I think billing becomes one of those collections. Absolutely just is one of those for 99% of humans, right? So that's why that gets hard, which we can address in a minute. But billing's very similar, right? It's very tedious. It's very data-driven. Accuracy is incredibly important. The data gathering process, at least historically, this is getting so much better with the tooling, especially AI-powered tools, which we can talk about some platforms that I love and partner with on this topic. It's getting better, but it is still a meticulous, laborious process. And then someone has to own it, right? Small business, not that many heads wearing multiple hats. And whenever you put on a hat you don't like, it goes really slowly. And so I think that's the root of it. Like, if we just are calling it what it is, it's not having the right butts in the right seats. Technology's helping. So if you have to do a job you don't really like doing, then AI powered tooling is making so many of these things better, thankfully. But
so it sounds like it's the standard.
Yeah.
a challenge in any aspect of people, processes, and technology. And those three things you can start to solve whatever the thing is. So in this case, it's billing, like you're saying, get the right button. And I want to ask more about, who those people should be later on. We'll get to that. But in terms of just sticking with the billing, like just on general, I mean, whether it's family law or anybody else, how often should firms be billing clients? And if you don't mind, mention like some of the tools that are going to help them do a better job, not of sending the bill out, but actually knowing what it is they should be billing for in terms of hours, materials, expenses, et cetera.
Absolutely. So I want to give my opinion, but with the asterisks of like every practice area is different. This is like, I don't want to cheese it too much either, but so let's say the status quo is monthly billing in the profession. That's just true, right? That's what everyone does. If we just look, it's got to be just anecdotally 90% plus that I've run into at least when we meet them. My opinion, just if you were to give a blanket advice, is biweekly, weekly if you have really fast moving timelines.
Biweekly. Like
more
than
every
once?
2 weeks. Yeah, twice a month.
Twice every other week. Okay.
Yeah, so twice a month. Not twice a week. No, twice a month. That's one of those words we always fight over, right? Semantically, we're like, biweekly, fortnightly, maybe I should say. No, but it's twice a month. I think is a really happy medium. The advice I give in all the classes I teach are: look, if you are struggling to get bills out on a monthly basis reliably, start there. Don't get fancy. Don't like, this is like me trying to lose weight or something. I'm going to just eat perfectly and no carbs, and I'm going to do and I just blow it out and fail. Like, maybe we should just get to a nice steady state with everything in the mix. So get monthly down to a science. Why? Because predictability is one of the biggest influencers in clients. If you don't bill regularly, you're teaching them that you don't care about getting paid, whether they're taking that consciously or they're taking it at least unconsciously. And they say, well, if they're not billing me and they don't care, then why should it be a priority for me to make sure I get this paid? So you're communicating a lot in the consistency with which you do that with your clients. So get monthly right first if you're struggling with that. If you've already mastered that, I would seriously consider looking at twice monthly. Again, if you have fast-moving milestones, this is where the practice area stuff comes in, or even the matter type.
I was going to ask you, do people ever bill based on milestones? Just to say,
certainly,
okay,
immigration does it all the time.
When we complete this or get to this point in the case.
Well, and that's why the timeline is so important, right? If you've got like a custody battle coming up, right, and a court appearance, you need to make sure there's money in retainer before you even get in there. But if you wait too long to replenish, you're not likely to get a chance to withdraw. That judge is not going to let you off, most likely, right? Because that's not a good enough reason. In super short notice, they need to have time to find adequate representation, and so you're just going to be stuck. And indentured servitude is the term I hear thrown around by a lot of attorneys. They're like, I'm stuck on the case now. And how I think it's an ethical quandary, personally, of like, I know I'm not going to get paid, but I have to do my level best to make sure that you have a great legal outcome. I just feel like that
would piss me off. I wouldn't be able to do it.
Exactly. Let's put it clearly. It pisses you off, right?
I'd be mailing that in. But so you were talking about, okay, so get on this frequency or this cadence of sending out invoices monthly if you can do it, weekly or twice a month. But I think the thing that I'm taking away from hearing that is you're building habits, not just for yourself, but for the clients. And as you said, they're expecting that bill. They're getting used to that bill. You've made it clear that getting paid is a priority. And so I think you've even said, like, just break. And it's funny enough, like I read where you said just do smaller, more frequent type of invoices. Those tend to get paid faster, right? Maybe it's just not as big of a bill. And I spoke with, I don't know if Linda Artisani and Sarah.
It's funny you say that. I was just thinking about her when you said that, but I didn't know you two knew each other. They
were on the show a couple of weeks ago, but this is a point that they made. I've spoken to some different accountants and financial people, and of course, getting paid always comes up, as a thing. We've never done a whole show focusing on it like we'll do here, but all of them have always said, like, just break the bills up into smaller, and just send them out more. Just send them out more regularly. And again, I think that's good for the firm. They're just getting the habit of that. And of course, it's awesome for the cash flow when that money just keeps hitting the bank account and those receivables come down. But so let's just talk for a moment here. I don't want to go like super deep, but let's just talk about some of the tools, both for collecting the data that they need that are going to go into the invoices, and then the tools that they should be using to actually send the bills, right? I assume I know the answer here. We're not sending out paper bills anymore and, hoping.
It's frustrating we have to qualify that still at this point, but it happens. And look, I'm not here to bag on anyone, but you're only hurting yourself, right, if you're doing that, unless you're in a very specific situation. But that's just crazy to me. I'm almost like reaching to try to, I'm just one of those people who always wants to be nice to everybody. I'm like, you should just stop though. So let's talk tooling, the base layer of what generates your bill. It's your practice management system. If you're not on one, get on one. That's step one. There's so much that comes with it. I know if you're a little old school, you've been at it a while, like I understand, like the pain of change is real, but it's what clients are coming to expect. And because it makes payment easier, as we were talking about earlier, that's going to radically improve your chances of having a sustainable, positive outcome too. So that's easy. I always recommend like Clio, MyCase, Smokeball. Those are the ones I work with most often. It's all about your segment of firm, practice area specific ones. You've got segments like as you go into mid-market and big law, those are going to be different platforms, right? Like a Centerbase, SurePoint, even bigger. I don't deal with a whole lot of big law personally, so I'm lacking in some recommendations there. But then talking about gathering the data, there is an explosion in this topic right now with like awesome vendors in the market. I've gotten to know, I think now.
Yeah, just for like time tracking and just
gathering
like
the data
AI tools.
From your email. So the three that spring to mind right away, so that I know the founders of all these companies, we all talk, right? And so like Tempello, I really like those guys. As far as I know, they integrate with Clio and MyCase. But they're going to be great at like pulling the data from your emails, those point ones, the 0.15s, right? Like getting that information in. They have some really cool technology on checking accuracy of your bills as well. I think that's almost a brand new feature that they're just bringing to market. We've got billables.ai. They've made a lot of waves. I think they won a big award at Legal Week. And so that's just a fantastic tool as well around gathering the information, integrating with multiple systems, right? Which will also be true of another one called Ajax. And I've worked with their team too, working on some content with them right now. And so those are great because they're going out into multiple systems. Your email is going to be the biggest source of bills that you're not, like the hours you're not billing for because it's so laborious to go gather them, and then you wait till the end of the week, the end of the month, you're losing them, you lost them, they're gone, right? And they all, like, I'm not going to pretend to have all the stats that these great companies have, but one thing that why I love these companies is they're the flip side of the coin from us, right, on the AR side. So getting the bills out the door is a realization problem. And so if you go back to Clio's Legal Trends report, the 93-day number is what's called total lockup. But if you look at that, they have a thing called realization lockup they measure, which is how long it's taking the average firm to get the bills out the door. And last time I checked, it was like 32, 36 days, more than a month to get the bill on average, right? So that's a problem. That's the average, which means half are doing it worse than that, right? Some are doing better, which is good. That's a long time, guys. You can't.
And it sounds ridiculous, right?
Like we can't even help until you do that part. And so it's one of those things that gets me. But what I found, and so we just had this, we haven't published the case study yet. We just got approval for it today, so I can get some a couple early stats on it. But the woman, who bought the dream car, I don't know if I told you this before we were recording or not, but we worked with the client, helped recover hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. We did this in conjunction with Ajax, who helped them find an average. So we got, I think, 470, I'm rounding a little bit, $1,000 back of earned money, right, back for this firm. And Ajax was in the mix as well, and they helped them find an average of $14,000 in billable, like truly billable hours that the work they had done but not billed for per user. So I think they had 3 users at the firm per month, right? Across the same time span, we were recovering well over $400,000, almost $500,000. So more dollars recovered, more dollars billed, and then she bought, her dream car. Yeah, I was like, oh my God. And so it's such a real world way to make that make that real, right, for an attorney. It's a smaller firm.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, finding more hours. And then so I think it's two sides, like more hours that you were never going to bill for, like if you didn't have the tool, which is amazing.
Money.
Free. These things are basically free. And then it's getting the bills out the door more quickly, right, which is improving the time to get paid. And what would they call lockup? We call it collections lockup after the fact, right?
And meaning what? You're just not getting paid?
Yeah, so that same legal trends report's great for this because it's stuff we were measuring, but we didn't have a good name for it. Clio came in and just dropped a great name on it. We're like, perfect, we'll line up with your marketing on this. But realization lockup is how long it's taking to get out the door. Collections lockup is how long it takes to get paid after the bill does get.
And so let me ask you this: what is, and maybe it varies, of course, and certainly the engagement terms matter. But what is a reasonable expectation in terms of how long should it get paid? How long should it take to get you paid? Particularly, and tell me if you're billing on a monthly basis, maybe that's different. But what if you're billing on a weekly basis? In other words, 30 days, you got 4 different bills that are hanging around out there. Can you create an expectation as, hey, these bills are due on receipt, or, after 5 days, I'm going to stop working?
Definitely, right? And so that's the thing, right, with attorneys and law firms that use retainers, and that's many, right, if not most, really should be 0 1 day to get paid, right? However long it takes you to draw money down from trust to pay your own bill, which is typically due on receipt in most of my experiences. Now, if you're in a different practice area, you're commercial or corporate, and you're invoicing, there's not a retainer on file, that you may already be giving net 30, net 60, net 90. If your client's like Apple or somebody, right, or Fortune 500 business, like even a net 90 is probably becoming a net 180, whether you like it or not, and you just have to really. You're not going to move Goliath on this one, right? So you need to build your business around. Now, that doesn't mean normalizing bad behavior. I mean, it kind of means that, I guess, a little bit. But I think following up on those things and being very timely, getting everything you need out the door that enables them to pay. I do this whole little bit when I give classes. Like, if you're in B2B, make friends with the AP person on the other side. No one is nice to AP people, right? Like, what is wrong with you, though? They're the gatekeepers of your money. Like,
how do you make friends with that person? You send them
to figure out who they are on LinkedIn. Send them some cookies, and here's what you do: whether they slow pay you all the time or not, just fib a little bit. Send them some cookies and say, like, so great partnering with you guys. We really appreciate that you guys get us taken care of. You're the best. Whether you mean it or not, unless it's so egregiously bad that they'll take it really sarcastically, like. You'd be surprised, like, how much that can impact. Like, oh, your bill just went to the top of the pile. Like, just be a friendly human. I know that sounds kind of silly, but it's people take care of people they like, right, at the end of the day. So that's
make it easier to ask for the money when you have to do it. If it's somebody you're friendly with,
they see your company's name and they go, oh, yeah, those guys. Yeah, all right.
I like
approve. Like, that's what you want.
So, all right. So I guess, obviously, when you get paid, it can vary. But let's just say, in general, for the firms that you generally work with, smaller, solo type of firms, family law practices, once the bill goes out, of course, or even potentially prior to, the next step is follow up. And I feel like, this is where it gets a little tricky for some people, because you need to be, and I think, and this is before, and we'll talk about escalation, but this is a bill that, maybe isn't getting paid and it needs to get paid, and you need to be firm, but you need to be able to do that without being a jerk off about it. As you put it, you just need to be a human, a kind human, and understand that maybe there's something going on. But so let me ask you this: why do clients fail to pay on time? Because my take has always been it's one of two reasons. You alluded to them earlier. Either they can't pay you or they've made a decision not to pay you for one reason or another. What else is out there, and what is most common here for what you see?
I think you've basically got it. The only third bucket I might put someone in is they've reached a point where they're like paralyzed by something that's going on and the service is being rendered, and they choose not to act, right? It's inaction instead of they're just burying their head in the sand. It might be something, look, if we think about attorneys not wanting to have that confrontation of like, you owe me money, I don't want to feel like a bad guy. Not every client, I know some do, most clients, most people don't want to be like, oh, you're a bad attorney or you did a bad job, I'm angry at you, right? They too have these feelings of confrontation avoidance, right? So there's probably something in there, and it may not be a full-blown decision not to pay, like categorically, like I'm not doing this. We call that a dispute, like a full-on dispute, right? There's something in the middle there, and I think that's where a lot of stuff gets lost of like, I don't feel good about what's going on, and because I don't have enough information, or I'm reluctant to confront the feelings I have with you as my service provider, I'm just gonna not. and kind of awkwardly avoid. And then they start ducking the calls, and then they do this. And I think it's our job as professionals trying to run successful businesses is to anticipate these things and build a workflow as such that if it reaches a certain age, we start to do different tactics that allow us to tease that out from them. And that's how I think about it. Is these are client services calls first, long before they're collections, anything, AR, anything. These are opportunities to talk to our clients, understand how they're doing. And, oh, yes, there is a bill due, but I'm checking in on you first. I want you to feel that I'm checking in on you, making sure you're doing well. Oh, yeah, by the way, we got that thing too. But that's secondary, right? Now, it's primary in our sustainability and like we want the outcomes. But the way we present it to the clients does not have to be aggressive, does not have to be money grubbing or this feeling of like, oh, these guys are jerks and only care about, my money. Then you're doing it wrong, right? That's why the aversion to collections, it's almost like I have a weird combo now. I'm realizing this is a weird moment. People don't like salespeople, right? Because of this grimy used car salesman's trope, right? It's the same reason I'm like, God, I'm not like that. I'm like consultative and let's work on it. And if it's not a fit, whatever. And then so we get a bad name, right? As salespeople sometimes in that way. I think collections very much gets a bad name in the same way. And there's so many interesting threads between that because, yeah, the hard, aggressive one, the collection agency types, there's more colorful language we won't use maybe on the recording, but it's like the stereotypes around collections. And I think that that's unfortunate because people think that it has to be that way because of these stereotypes.
Like you have to send somebody to shake them down. Like
exactly, some trench
coat. That'd be cool if CollBox had an option for something like that.
On April Fools, I'm just going to start. I'm going to market it, and then no, but yeah. We'll
so you mentioned the key here, right? Is to have a process around the follow-ups here when bills don't get paid. What does that look like? And then also like how much of that should be automated, how much of that should be human, and then,
right.
and how much of that should be an assistant versus the actual attorney working on the matter?
Totally. Yeah, great question. So I think this is kind of like the monthly billing versus the twice monthly or weekly. Look, try to be perfect, of course, if you can, but if it's at the expense of doing anything consistently, then don't, right? So if it has to just be automations, right? Email reminders, get some text messaging in there. Start there, like start small. I gave that class at the ALA National Conference a few weeks ago, like I mentioned, and it was clear to me from like, I ask a lot of like, raise your hand if this, raise your hand if that, are we using this, are we doing that? And it was clear to me that almost no one in that room, and we had 100, almost 150 people in there. It was a pretty packed classroom, which is good news, bad news. I'm always like, I'm glad you're here, but is that bad, huh? Everyone laughs. And so, but almost no one there was using text messaging, right? Interesting. So I said, look, I gave you a lot of information. Don't freak out and try to go implement everything we just talked about for an hour plus. That's not going to work out. It never works out, right? Maybe we just go figure out a way to implement text messaging in the next couple months, right? Like it's better. Like don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Is always the thing in business ownership. And so that's one thing. Start reasonably. I think automation, look, built into your practice management system. There's email reminders, increasingly text messaging. There's other vendors out there. It's obviously something I dabble in and work on and try to build the best mousetrap possible on this front. But if I guess, just to put it plainly, if email reminders were enough, then I wouldn't have a business, and at least in the CollBox side of things. And so the human phone calls are a big, big deal. Doesn't mean you have to use us. Someone needs to own that process, and we need to pick up the phone. I've coached sales teams as becoming a senior salesperson in my life. Early and junior salespeople like, oh, I just emailed them to follow up on it. I'm like, did you call them? Well, I emailed them to follow up on it. Did you call them? And so it's not dissimilar. Again, I guess I'm going to be obsessed with this parallel here between collections and sales.
But that is a great point, right? It isn't enough to just send an email message. Very much the way you pointed out, it's not enough to just put it in your engagement agreement. You actually have to get on the phone, get a hold of somebody, and then I think this is where I want to go next. When do you start getting nervous? In other words, you're calling, maybe you can't get a hold of them. You've sent a couple texts, you're getting ghosted there. Mm-hmm. Is that when you start going, okay, because I want to talk about escalation at some point, but are we there yet? Like, when do you start going, all right, we got a problem?
It depends on the velocity. Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the velocity of your cases, right? So this is something I spend a lot of time on in classes and consults of like, what are your leverage points in your particular practice areas, in your matter types? That's really different across different ones. Immigration, really long timeline sometimes. Family law, situation with a divorce, like if they're not paying within 30 days or less, like I'm out. I got to get out or I won't be allowed to withdraw, right? So these are all very different things, corporate litigation, how big of a client is it? How tolerant are we going to be? Again, is it Apple? I don't know. Is it a massive corporate client? There's no perfect answer for this, like one size fits all answer at least. But I think the most important thing we can do is know our timelines, right, of our general case. This is your sales cycle, if you like, or, the service delivery period, rather. And then what are the milestones? And then we need to have adequate touch points for every step of the way. And as we get closer to talking about getting nervous, I start to get nervous when we're running out of massive leverage points and there's no communication. Either if we have retainers, they're not refilling them anymore, and they're not paying the past due bills, which are the result of not having money in trust. Starting to get pretty nervous at that point when the final thing to sign off on the whole practice, the whole legal matter is in 2 weeks, like in 3 weeks. Is it something I can pull out of? That's probably too late, right? Depending on the practice area.
But you've mentioned this a couple of times, these leverage points. Can you just detail what those are so people understand? I know there's a couple of them that I've read you've mentioned.
Yeah, so there's a few. At the beginning, it's important to remember, this is true of any kind of sales engagement. No one is in greater need / has greater excitement or greater pain than when they first engage with you, right? So that's the main thing. They're engaging with you, they've signed, you've sold the deal, right? You brought them on as a client. This is the peak time, like they have the greatest need and probably the greatest enthusiasm that they're going to have, right? So we really need to make sure we're capturing that. That's getting money in trust, setting good expectations, things like that. But as we go through the cases, when I talk about leverage points, for me, it comes down to if we go to the very end, what is the last possible time to pull the ripcord and get out of this, right? So that they don't have the legal outcome they're hoping to have, right? The delivery of services for me until this point. When is my absolute exhaustion of leverage? This is like, and criminal is a common one. Oh, I got you off. You did it. And if you haven't gotten paid by then, it's weird. But like I've had countless criminal defense attorneys tell me, I got this dude off of like a felony conviction of blah, 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 blah. And like they still didn't pay me. So turns out gratitude in certain instances isn't enough. It isn't always enough, let's say. It can be. But there's more important spaces in between, right? Because what happens also is, where are they digging the most hole of where they owe you? Where are you generating the most hours of work, if you're billable hours, right? Right before a trial, right before this, right before that. And we need to make sure we're getting, money in trust, if that's going to be the appropriate way to do it, or paid up front, whatever the case may be, or at least at staying current with what is due before that point. And that goes back to looking at the data on your cases, your matter types, your practice area. Where are we generating, at what point in the life cycle of the case are we generating the most hours, right? The billable hours. Then we need to be extra careful in those points. So in particularly measure the leverage around there so we don't give up, which is what our talents are, our knowledge, our expertise, and the sweat of our brow, if you like, the effort, without making sure we're set up to succeed. And so these are the big things. This just goes back to data. Like, again, if you generate most of your work here and all of the work's there, you need to be getting a lot of that up front, right? A huge percentage of that up front if you can, if not all of it. Sometimes that's not practical. But then if there are other milestone points, we need to make sure that the rest of that's getting cleaned up and paid for before we give them that final bundle, right? That packet, whatever it is for your practice area. Immigration, right? Well, you're a citizen now, or, you have a green card now. Like, there are these things, right, that are the massive value creation points.
Yeah, that would seem to me, that would be crazy if you're trying to ask for money after you've done the thing. I would want to be asking for that money right before you get the thing done, but maybe they don't want to pay until they get the actual outcome, so it's this balance. But let's talk about the escalation process, right? Because now you're sending out reminders, Bill's not getting paid, and at some point it's like, this isn't working, right? And you've said, and I've heard this, time is the enemy, right? And in some cases, 90 days past due, I think the stat you cited, that invoice loses 46% of its value. And so I think to translate that, if you had 100 invoices that are 90 days past due, you're not going to be collecting on 46% of those. And so there's a real risk there of having some bad debt. So what happens, and I know you've said there's different levels, what happens at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days past due? Can you just quickly talk about each one of those a little bit, how you handle those, because they're different levels of severity here?
Yeah, and 30, 60, 90 in the world of AR are so important. These are like typical milestones. You're going to have to map those, again, to the milestones of your practice areas. For an immigration case that takes 2 years, you extend the timeline out, right? But it's always good to know what bucket means what for you, right? And what do we do at each step? That's all it really comes down to. Timelines shift, but how are we escalating? And withdrawal is a form of escalation. It's a big form of escalation. So when we talk about leverage, it is the leverage to withdraw and stop doing legal work for you. So that is what an internal escalation, as opposed to like a collection agency, things like that. Which we
is that what you called the point of no return?
Yeah. I think at some point, there's a few ways to view that depending on the piece of content. But when we've given up all of our leverage, that's past the point of no return, right? And so that's one of those. And yeah, knowing where that is for you across practice areas is really important, and matter types as well. So that's one form of escalation, right? Is withdrawing. The threat of withdrawal is a form of escalation, right? I think of accounts receivable as a series of actions across the timeline, and it is gently turning up the temperature as we go, right? Time usually as a function of time, but milestones need to be mapped out on that time, right? And so, yeah, saying, hey, we're not getting money in trust. You have 15 days to replenish that, or we're gonna stop work on your account. Stop work as distinct from withdrawal, right? So there's all these. You ran out of money in trust. We pause immediately, right? There's no money to pay us. Ideally, you're considering work in progress, right? So the things we have, as opposed to what's in trust. Never mind net new billing. And you spoke about this a second ago, but the problem that why people blow past that point, why attorneys blow past that point, is no one went to law school to be a bill collector, right? They went to law school to be an attorney. And no one really joined a law firm to be a bill collector either, most of the time, again, given the small law firm idea. So people want to do what they're good at, their superpowers, what they're excited about. And we just put on blinders to those other things that we don't want to think about, and they just keep trucking. And then, wow, we've gone 20, 30, 50 hours deep on something, tens of thousands of dollars, later. That's the root of it, right? Is people don't have a system that forces them that they have to obey, that allows them to see what's happening in real time as much as possible and have good visibility, measure that against the real financial cost, right? Of what it's actually costing them. And then the checks and balances along the way to say, warning, we're running out of trust money. Stop. Red rubber banding, as we call it sometimes, right? That file in the old school, paper version of that, red rubber band meant no new work. We don't touch that one until they get back in our good graces. And then there's more escalations, right? Once we've withdrawn or the matter's over, so whether you withdrew or not, but either way, the legal representation has severed, right? They still owe you some money. There are demand letters, right, which we can send. Of course, it's a threat of additional action if you don't make good on it. It's a really good opportunity to offer a settlement or a discount or a payment plan. By the way, I know we have limited time on these things. Payment plans are a thing that should always be in play, but at various points in the escalation process, right? You wouldn't start from day one if you don't have to, practice area dependent, but later on, and then discounts, settlements, things like that, definitely come into play towards the end of it, right? Because now we don't have any leverage anymore, right? We're no longer representing them, so I actually can't threaten to withdraw anymore. I've already withdrawn, and that didn't work, right? So that stops the bleeding, but now we need to find a way to get back what they actually still owe us. Well, that's when a carrot or the stick, right? And that the carrot is a discount, payment plan, a settlement. Hey, pay by this date. We're going to cut it in half or take 25% off, something meaningful, whatever that means to the client. Or the stick, right, is we're going to send you to collections or we're going to file suit. And that opens a whole new can of worms we have to be aware of too. Most attorneys won't file suit because there's concerns around then really bar complaints. That's the vindictive. You send me to collections or file a suit against me, a lot of clients will then reciprocate, if you like, and go file a bar complaint. Or not a lot, but it happens for sure, more likely at those stages.
That's the only tool they have, right? They're unhappy for some reason and they want.
Exactly. But ideally, we've talked multiple checkpoints before then and figured that out and known that, and then known not to send them, even if they weren't paying. I do this on consults all the time. You got to decide, a bar complaint is not likely the end of the world, so long as you're operating above board, you got everything together. But it is your time and it's your sanity, all these things. And so we don't want that all the time, especially over like a $500 invoice, right? So it's a risk appetite thing, right? And risk reward actually as well. And then the other thing with filing suit that a lot of people do know, but like, your E&O insurance can be impacted. Sometimes your carriers will up your premiums, drop you. There are clauses, I've been hearing more of this lately, just anecdotally. I get a great rate on my insurance because I've written that I will not file suit against my clients. Like you're claiming and committing that you will not. I'm sure that you still could, but then what happens? Do they void your coverage? I don't know all these things, right?
Yeah,
but,
that's interesting though. I mean, it's, like getting car insurance, you get a ticket, you get in an accident, your rates are going to go up, you're a higher risk. So let's a couple more things I want to talk to you about before we wrap up. But, one of those, the idea of, delegating, and outsourcing this type of stuff, because like you said, a lot of lawyers are not trained on bill collection and don't necessarily want to be that person chasing clients for money, because in some ways I feel like it's actually better if you're the attorney, you preserve the relationship. That's your job. If you can, have somebody else maybe handling the dirty work, or at least having those difficult conversations, they can circle back for you, but you're not the face of the bad conversation. And so, you have said there should be someone, if you have the capacity within your firm, they should own collections. And so who's best suited for that job?
Yeah, it's a great question. Size of firm is almost everything. Kind of how many hands do we have around the table? Look, we got to get by with what we've got in terms of our resources and our budgets. I think number one, attorneys should never be doing this ever. This is my obviously very biased opinion, but no. Your billable staff, right? You are the product, right? And in many, many ways, like in most ways, right? Depending on what kind of law you're in, you can't be, if you're service delivery, you're the one, you can't also be chasing that. It becomes, a utilization crisis at that point, right? So are we actually, like, how many hours of the day are we spending on real billable work if that's the way we do business, right?
So is the idea here, if you're a solo, but you have anybody else that can do this, have them do it.
Yeah, and there's just kind of like this thing, and actually, again, the ideal state, and then there's like, but let's be more practical and let's just be better. So if not the attorney, if that has to be a paralegal, fine. Paralegals are still billable staff. In my opinion, shouldn't do that either, right? Again, service delivery, billable hours. But if that's all you got, that's all you got. Do it. After that, administrative, non-billable staff, right? Anyone else that's not billable staff, let's get them there. And then where that can be really successful, though, is if they are trained for it or if they have like the attributes for it. Okay, some people, they're like 1%, I feel like, of people. They don't mind. They have thick skin. They're charismatic. I actually think salespeople can be really good at this. I've always said that and thought that, but now I'm like in this conversation kind of bridging all these weird gaps here in my head. But
it makes sense. You've made that connection a few times. And the thing about sales is you're asking for something. You're ultimately
asking for money, right?
In exchange for the thing that you offer. But it seems like that person, would be perfect.
And they have thick skin, I think, right? Like coming up, man, I made cold call. I did all the stuff right out of college. Like it was brutal, but I built up a really thick skin, and like you get told no way more times than you get told yes in sales, right? And so that's a unique personality type. You got to be able to handle rejection and all those things. So I think that could be kind of interesting. But if you have an office manager or firm administrator type that is built for that, you may just be there. Like what also happens in the mix there is a billing clerk. Sometimes firms will hire, you made a couple hires, you hire a billing clerk. They get your bills out the door. Be very careful with this one. It is almost impossible to find a billing clerk that is very good at billing. That's accuracy, systems, procedures, very meticulous, right? Consistent, all these things. That also happens to be great at the kind of almost that salesperson, charismatic, thick-skinned, very good at talking on the phone. Like, think about it. Just think about it for a second. So most people will put that on a billing clerk because they think billing and collections, peanut butter and jelly, I got this. It's not the same personality type overwhelmingly, right? If you've got that 1%, that unicorn, hold on to them, compensate them well. Like never lose them, because I don't find anyone like that. And so like that's important. Then you start to go out, right? From there, you go, okay, we've got offshore VAs, we've got onshore VAs. We've already talked about assistants.
So you can outsource this. That was going to be my next question. Is there a way to outsource this? Is there a fractional bill collector, or go on Upwork and find somebody that can just make these calls for you? Whatever it is that there sounds like you have an approach for that.
Totally, right? And so that, that bleeds into CollBox, right, and what we do, and we can talk about that, but it doesn't have to be us, right? I think the education's the same. It's just a function of, like, did you find someone who gets what you need to do, has the skill set, and for the price point that you want, and that's going to handle it in a white glove way, right? You're an attorney, you're a law firm. That is very important and different, right? Someone just kind of banging the phones, chasing down invoices, that evokes different imagery sometimes, right? So just make sure it's someone with experience with professional services firms, maybe regulated industries. Sometimes medical can help here a little bit. I think that it's quite different in other ways, but someone that values confidentiality a lot, again, has those resources. That's going to be sort of the important
It seems like somebody that's worked as an account manager, client success manager, something like that. They're comfortable talking to clients and, framing things in positive ways, but also asking for the things that they need. Just real quick here, you mentioned the importance of doing a monthly review of your accounts receivable. And so I want to talk about that, because it's the idea that around the set it and forget it approach isn't going to really collect your cash, right? And you're going to end up in a situation where your money's in somebody else's account. So how often, like what is the process that firms should be following in terms of looking at their AR and how that stuff is aging over time?
Mm-hmm. When we talk about it over time to get like the bigger picture, I think monthly, quarterly, yearly can be good. For the actual driving of like the AR process, weekly, right? So increasingly we're seeing firms do weekly AR reviews, but this is again more pushing people who like actively owe money and like, are we withdrawing? Are we doing that's into the weeds? So a weekly AR meeting is becoming really common, and I definitely agree with as a best practice. But in terms of the numbers, right? Let's talk like frequency, like we said, and then KPI. So most business owners, not just attorneys, are not reviewing their financials that often, right? We pay a bookkeeper, an accounting firm. Quick shout out again to Linda and Sarah, because they are the best in the business. So the proper trust, I'm a huge fan of. So you gotta give them a plug too. But they run a community of accounting firms that specialize in legal, which is crazy. Like they're teaching their competitors how to do great work, which is amazing. And so. But like that's one thing. Like we already aren't leveraging our accounting professionals enough. Like looking at our real like P&Ls and our balance sheets and things like that, right? We need to be looking at those things more often as business owners, most likely. But in terms of the AR, there's some KPIs I would throw out. We talked a little bit about them, but lockup, right? Collections lockup starts with collection percentage, right? Collection rate. What percentage of what we bill do we actually get paid for? That's the one some firms are getting pretty good at measuring. And I'll throw another benchmark out again from the Legal Trends report. That floats between 89 to 92% in terms of a typical collection rate for the firms inside that report. That gives everyone's a little bit different, but it's actually pretty high, which is the opposite of what you feel like when you talk to firms. So we'll talk about like the second layer of that, but measure your collections rate. You should understand of what we bill, how much do we get paid for? That's a good metric. Then there's lockup, which is how long does it take us to get paid for that? That's the more insidious one that I think one person in that 150 people raised their hand as like, you could tell no one even really knew what lockup was, never mind measuring it. So collection rate, pretty about half. We're like, oh yeah, we look at that. But that's important. And we need to be looking at those things as a part of our standard financial reporting, which is not typically in our standard financial reporting. So I think monthly, quarterly, yearly, looking for trends. Not how we police it. That weekly AR meeting is very important, but I think looking at the numbers, absolutely. Monthly, quarterly, yearly.
Right, and it just goes to, the whole idea of, you can't manage what you're not measuring, so having this regular cadence that it's on your calendar, you're just going to take a look at it. I imagine it doesn't take a ton of time to figure out what your percentage of invoices collected and how long it's taking.
There's reports inside your practice management for this stuff now too, right? All the more reason to be using a practice management system that has a reporting suite built into it. Like,
right,
you don't have to go Excel crazy on this, right? You could just go run the stock.
Click a couple of buttons and you'll have that answer. But now whatever you need to do, maybe you're doing great and cool, and you just continue to do great and monitor that. But when you have a problem, know how to address it. So in terms of like wrapping up this discussion, right, going all the way back, like, so if a firm wants to improve, like just some kind of high level answers here, some quick ones, but if a firm wants to improve collections, where do they start? What's the first step?
I think it's being honest with yourself about like those leverage points, those are going to be really big ones. And then get some basic touch points in communication into the clients. Make sure we're just picking up the phone. I mean, I would love for it to be on a schedule and with a cadence and thought out, but pick up the phone, because most of you are not picking up the phone. I think that's actually one easy win. I do like systems and measurement, but pick up the phone, talk to your clients. Again, it doesn't have to be the attorney, ideally, if it's someone else, but someone needs to be understanding like why they're not paying, and treat it like a client services call. How's it going? I'm checking in on you. Just noticed this thing happen. What's going on? What can we do? Any questions about that bill? Super warm, super friendly, not confrontational, because you're going to learn a lot too, right? Not only will you improve the chance of collecting, which is fantastic and important, but you're going to learn why they're not paying. And that might speak to some, intake, other processes, expectation setting, quality of service. Do you have a junior associate on that one and it's not going? I don't know. These are things that can happen, right? So have more conversations, human conversations, and do it more frequently. That's the big one.
I think I think that's a great place to wrap us up here. Just pick up the phone, talk to people, because everything I think we've been talking about, it's all quantitative. Like, how much are we owed? How long is it taking to get paid? How many invoices are we sending out? This is the qualitative thing, really understanding what is going on over there, collect that data so you have a better understanding of what the holdup is here. So everybody, I'm here with Matt Darner. He's the co-founder and CEO of CollBox, and we've been talking about strategies and workflows to get you paid. So I want to talk to you now about CollBox and how does that work? I don't know anything about it, honestly, and I'd love to hear how that helps with this entire process that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, we try to do the needful and do the thing that almost no one wants to do, right? Which is pick up the phone. And so it's interesting to live in the world of technology, and we are a tech company by one measure, right? I think of us as kind of a half tech, half services business, which is interesting. The joke amongst my co-founder and I is, well, we tried to start a tech company. We really did. We found a very services-shaped problem, so we just kept chasing it organically, and we found that time and again, people aren't having those conversations. They're not picking up the phone and learning what's going on. And so, at the end of the day, CollBox is built to take over the past due bill chasing for law firms. So it's a service you subscribe to. You keep 100% of what's recovered. We're not a collection agency. We don't take a cut, but we do integrate directly with the leading practice management systems out there, Clio, MyCase, Smokeball. We have some accounting integrations as well. And we'll start detecting automatically when the bills go past due, right? So, and then from there, it's running a cadence, right? We do email reminders, resending the bill, relaying the payment instructions, a lot of the clerical stuff associated we do in more of a technological way. And then we have a team that I've built of folks trained in accounts receivable, right? That 1% who like making the calls. We literally go recruit people that have been AR managers, AR clerks, collection specialists, and we do that all in North America, almost all US based, in fact. And so I say North America because we have some reps in Mexico for Spanish speaking firms, otherwise all US based. So that's kind of a different twist as well. We really want people trained with that financial background, that AR background on the phone. And then it's built for small firms, right? So the average small business of any kind, but especially small law firm, doesn't have 40 hours a week of this kind of work. You don't need a full-time staff member. So we go hire one person and basically fractionalize the phone call piece. And so one of our reps can support about 10 to 20 law firms at a time. And it's just a flat monthly subscription fee for us to just bring the cadence in, essentially, and execute it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing, because really when I was talking to you, obviously I know you're a tech founder. I didn't realize there was this human component of it, but of course it really does. It ties into everything you've been saying. Is just the idea of picking up the phone and how that's the very thing that can move the needle, but also the very thing that people don't have time for or don't feel comfortable with doing, and that you can take that off their plate. Because one of the things I had in the back of my mind is, I think when I mentioned, you got to hire someone on Upwork, it's like, I wonder if there's like a fractional person that calls these people for you, and here we are. I'm talking to the guy.
Me up. I appreciate it. No, it's really, it's kind of the ick factor, right? And it's like people in your firm can do it. So like, I don't want to go too hard on the CollBox pitch, but it's at the end of the day, you can do it, right? It's just a question of, do you have the right butt and the right seat, And we've been able to do this for starting at $600 a month, typically, like for smaller firms, right? So a sixth of the cost of hiring someone similarly qualified. So that's a pretty big win, right? In terms of getting the price down, because you don't, again, need them for 40 hours a week. It's not like a full-time hire. And the tech helps, but it's a lot of phone calls too. Like that's the big thing. But I think that's the end of the day.
When someone calls, do they say, hey, I'm Jason, I'm calling from firm that we're working on behalf of?
Yeah, we represent as the firm. First party, as we say. And yeah, so that's a big deal too. Not a third party. When we talk about debt collectors and collection agencies, none of that. Don't touch the money. In fact, we use the existing payment methods you have too. So no CollBox Pay or special payment rails. If you're on Clio with Clio payments, or my case with LawPay, Smokeball with LawPay or Smokeball payments, great. Want to check in the mail? Don't recommend that. You should probably open it up for digital payments, right? We coach the clients a lot on like we said earlier, like make it easy to pay. Technically, if you want someone to show up at your office with a bag of pennies, we'll tell them that. We really wish you wouldn't. No, I'm joking. But yeah, we integrate, and that's the nice thing too, is our integrations with the practice management systems give us most of what we need on that payment links, things like that. That makes it, that really allows us to just get in and do the hard part that no one wants to do.
Yeah, the important part, the part that's ultimately going to move the needle to get people paid. And so it sounds like a pretty awesome product and service. So, all right, Matt, where can everyone find you? CollBox.co. That's right. The website. I know that you've mentioned that if somebody needs help getting paid for the hard work they put in, they can reach out to you to schedule a free accounts receivable consultation. Again, they can do that at CollBox.co. Matt, I know you've said to me you're most active on LinkedIn, so you can connect with Matt on LinkedIn. Also CollBox you can connect with as well. I'll make sure to include all this information in the show notes, the website, the links to the LinkedIn. Anything else, Matt, you want to add? Anything else we've missed? What else do we have to say here?
I think we've covered most of it. The thing that I like to kind of wrap on is, it's like I feel like my job, obviously I'm trying to build valuable things, help everyone out, give this education. But most of the time, I think it's just a reminder that you're not a bad person for wanting to be paid for your hard work, right? And we can do great things, and the things that got you to go be an attorney or join a law firm, and the things you're passionate about, we have to do that from a place of sustainability, right? So it doesn't mean everything's about the money, collections, it doesn't have to be the number one priority, but whatever that number one priority is, and it's okay if it's money, I'm not bagging on you for that. Like, you want to be successful and wealthy, that's not bad. I don't think that's bad either. But even if it's to help people, and it usually is, most attorneys I work with have huge hearts. They're working their butts off for these people. We got to do that from a place of sustainability. And the first thing to get in your head is you're not the bad guy, right? Or the bad person for wanting to be paid for your work. You're working really hard. You also went through a lot of schooling and built a business so that you could help people. And I think just let me be your cheerleader a little bit to kind of wrap this up and remind you, like, you're not a bad person. So it's okay to get paid for your work, right? So.
Well, thanks, Matt. I think that's a really nice way to put it, and that we can end on that. So I appreciate you joining me today, Matt. This has been a really cool conversation. Like I said, we've gotten into sort of the finance and the accounting stuff in general, but we've never been quite so laser focused on the idea of collections. And I think I learned a lot today, and clearly there's some resources out there that Matt can offer to help anybody that needs it. But Matt Darner, everybody, that's going to be it for today. We've got lots of shows coming up here, recording 1, 2, 3 a week at this point. So stay tuned, check it out, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Marsh, and I appreciate you joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other lawyers who might benefit. You can find more resources and insights on building a thriving law firm at alphalawyer.io or the Alpha Lawyer YouTube channel. Till next time, keep building the firm of your dreams so you can live your best life.